Between 1847 and 1874, 97 people vanished from a remote West Virginia mountain settlement, not in one event, but in an eerily precise pattern. Every 3 months on the night of the new moon, someone disappeared, leaving behind a single leather-left shoe filled with mountain clay and pine needles placed perfectly in the center of the bed. The clay was always warm, as if freshly taken from deep underground. When federal investigators finally reached Hollow Ridge in the winter of 1874, they found 312 residents living in suspicious prosperity Boston-quality clothes, on their children imported delicacies on their tables, and ledgers showing wealth no isolated community should have. Yet every resident answered inquiries with the exact same phrase spoken in the same measured tone. The mountain keeps its own accounts. What the investigators found in the abandoned copper mine beneath Hollow Ridge was sealed in government records for over a century, still partially redacted today. The origins of this mystery began not with the vanishings, but with the settlement's desperate founding. In 1845, 43 families fled the collapsed coal economy of Pennsylvania, led by Josiah Henley, a former mine foreman, famed for his uncanny ability to locate copper. Determined to build a community free from banks and coal companies, Henley handpicked skilled miners, engineers, chemists, and craftsmen. Each family brought vital expertise, from blasting tunnels to processing ore to designing deep mine ventilation systems. The site was chosen after Henley heard tales from a Cherokee guide, Joseph Stoncrow, about a valley his people feared, a place where water ran red, animals refused to nest, and strange lights moved beneath the ground on moonless nights. Cherokee legends called it the place where the earth bleeds a forbidden land, even to ancient tribes. Henley saw only opportunity, confirming through secret surveys that the valley contained copper of unmatched purity and depth. In 1846, after a grueling 3-week trek, the settlers reached the valley, isolated by towering peaks and dense forests where daylight barely touched the ground. By autumn, the population neared 200. They had built a sawmill on Burden Creek, whose spring floods stained the water and mill wheel a rust-red hue, and a general store whose ledgers would one day become key evidence. Hollow Ridge seemed to thrive, but its prosperity came at a cost. The outside world would not fully understand for generations. By the end of 1846, Hollow Ridge had a one-room schoolhouse where Mrs. Elenina Cranston taught 32 children using books from a mysterious benefactor in Baltimore who refused to reveal their identity. At the settlement's center stood a Methodist church, its steeple the only structure to catch the morning sun before it reached the valley floor. Reverend Paul Sutterfield preached each Sunday about providence and perseverance, likening their journey to the Israelites entering Canaan. Over time, his sermons shifted toward themes of sacrifice and covenant, though few noticed the change. A monthly postal route connected Hollow Ridge to the outside world, run by Daniel Moss, a Cherokee Welsh mail carrier, who later recalled the unsettling feeling of always being watched and the way residents whispered among themselves when he arrived. No one sent personal letters, only correspondence about copper shipments. Visitors were quick to notice the settlement's peculiarities. Hollow Ridge produced copper ingots of 99.9% purity, yet no outsider had ever seen the smelting process. Mining shifts began at midnight and ended before dawn, with workers using a concealed entrance that visitors were never allowed near. Miners and their families refused to discuss their work, and the copper itself was unlike any other telegraph companies prized. Its conductivity, jewelers noted, it never tarnished and felt unusually warm. And in 1847, Harvard scientist Dr. Edmund Whitlock visited, but soon left academia entirely, his notes missing crucial pages. The first disappearance occurred on March 15, 1847, 18 months after the founding, on both the new moon and the spring equinox. 19-year-old Margaret Dietrich vanished from her cabin during the night. Her bed was perfectly made, the window open to the freezing air, and on her pillow sat her left shoe initials tooled into the leather filled with damp clay and pine needles, carrying an unidentifiable metallic organic scent. The shoe's wear suggested she had walked hundreds of miles, though it was only 2 months old, and inside the hardened clay formed a perfect mold of her foot. The search was exhaustive, 5 miles in every direction. Mines and caves checked, Burden Creek dragged, but yielded no trace. Dogs refused to follow her scent. Near an ancient Cherokee marker stone, searchers found 17 freshly dead ravens arranged in a perfect circle. Their necks twisted at the same angle, wings spread identically, and a handprint matching Margaret's pressed unnaturally deep into the frozen ground. Fresh axe marks led toward a sealed ancient mine shaft, their heights rising from the ground to 20 feet up a tree, cut at disturbing angles that seemed almost meaningful, but defied understanding. 3 months later, on June 15th, the summer solstice, 34-year-old William McCready vanished while on guard duty at the mine entrance. His replacement found the post empty at midnight, his left shoe placed neatly on the stool, still warm with the same clay and pine needles, the mine key inside. His rifle was untouched, his pipe still smoking. The locked mine door stood open. Inside, footprints began 30 feet into the tunnel, as if he had appeared from nowhere, then trailed another 100 feet before stopping dead at a solid wall of stone. By September, when 8-year-old Timothy Cranston vanished, fear gripped Hollow Ridge. He had been playing in the afternoon sun with other children, when in an instant he was gone like a candle snuffed out. His shoe was later found in the exact center of the locked church, to which Reverend Sutterfield alone held the key. This time, the clay inside contained tiny shards that looked like crystallized blood, a phenomenon no one could explain. Families nailed boards across their doors, men patrolled with rifles loaded with bullets blessed in the church, and mothers tied their children to their wrists with rope when leaving the house. A few tried to flee, but broken wagons, sudden illness, and violent storms always forced them back, as though the valley itself refused to let them go. Henley then called a meeting that would define Hollow Ridge's fate. On a fog-drenched night so dense, people had to hold hands to avoid getting lost. Every resident gathered in the church. Lantern light turned the mist into a halo around them as Henley addressed the crowd. Witnesses later recounted his words with exacting precision, as if branded into their minds. "We came here seeking fortune, and fortune demands sacrifice. The mountain gives us copper, copper gives us wealth, and wealth demands payment." We all understood this when we signed the compact. We all agreed to the terms. The lottery is fair, the selection is random, and the obligation is absolute. We are not the first to make this bargain, and we will not be the last. The mountain has been feeding longer than human memory, and it will continue long after we are gone. For now we serve, and it provides. Then Martha Sutterfield rose and asked the question that would echo in survivor testimonies for decades. "What did you find in the old working Josiah?" "What did you wake up?" Henley's answer was to produce a leather-bound journal written in a language older than any known indigenous script, yet every person present could somehow understand it without translation. It told of an ancient mining operation, centuries or millennia old, that had discovered the same copper and made the same bargain. The book described in detail the ritual of selection, the sacrifice schedule, and a ledger noting that 2,347 lives had been given to the mountain before that civilization vanished, leaving behind the sealed mine and the warning stones the Cherokee had respected for generations. Cherokee oral tradition, recorded by ethnographer James Mooney in 1891, spoke of a hole in the earth older than memory, older perhaps than humanity itself. The Cherokee avoided it entirely, never hunting within 5 miles, performing annual sealing rites that could take weeks, offering trade goods to keep it closed. They called it the breathing place, where the earth exhaled poison and inhaled sustenance. Their stories told of beings neither human nor spirit miners who had built underground chambers where up became down and tunnels folded in on themselves, leading to impossible spaces larger inside than the mountain could contain. These miners had not died. They had become what they mined, flesh to metal bone, to ore blood to the red water that bled from the earth each spring. On certain nights it was said their picks could still be heard striking stone, though the sound came from directions that did not exist in the normal world. In 1561, Spanish explorers in the Central Appalachians documented vast pre-Columbian mines. Rodrigo de Guzman, lieutenant to Hernando Dotto, wrote of vertical shafts 500 feet deep, perfectly round, and too smooth to have been carved by hand, their walls appearing melted. One shaft led to a chamber containing copper figures so lifelike they were mistaken for corpses, faces locked in expressions of agony or ecstasy, hands raised as if in surrender. When a soldier struck one to take a piece, it crumbled to dust, and the man died within hours, sweating a copper-scented fluid. The local guides refused to go near, calling the shafts the domain of the Star Walkers, beings who had come from the sky to harvest the earth's blood and had merged with it to guard it forever. One elder speaks with thunder, told of lights moving underground in patterns that defied human understanding. When Henley's settlers arrived in 1845, they found these ancient workings partially collapsed, but still open to those willing to enter. The main shaft dropped 400 feet through solid rock before opening into a sprawling cavern system of bewildering complexity. The descent was perilous, its original ladder long rotted away, leaving only iron brackets embedded in the stone, many eerily transformed into copper by an unknown process. Henley's crew rigged ropes and wooden platforms, working by lamplight in a shaft so perfectly vertical that a dropped tool would fall nearly 30 seconds before the sound of impact returned. In the deepest chamber they could reach, the walls were sheathed in a crystalline copper. Unlike anything in geological records, metal so pure it could be peeled off in sheets, branching in patterns like veins and neural networks, studded with nodules that gave off a strange pulsing light. When Henley touched one, he felt not an electric shock, but something deeper resonating through his bones, filling his mind with visions of impossible places and moments that hadn't yet occurred. Friedrich Dietrich, working in secret, tested the copper in a hidden cellar lab. His later recovered notes described properties defying science. The metal held a constant temperature of 98.6 degrees no matter the conditions. When melted, it became ingots 3 times denser than ordinary copper. And when placed in water, it caused the liquid to pulse in patterns like breathing, the currents synchronizing when multiple samples were present, as though the pieces were communicating. Staring too long at these movements, Dietrich warned, brought on blinding headaches and nightmares of suffocating underground, while unable to die. Hollow Ridge's wealth grew almost overnight. By 1850, it outproduced 3 of the territory's largest mines combined. Houses were as grand as those in Charleston, children wore New York finery, winters brought Florida oranges, and every home had running water heated by copper pipes that stayed mysteriously warm. Gas lamps burned with a blue-green flame that never seemed to exhaust their fuel. Yet no visitor ever saw a miner dirty from work. Men emerged at dawn, spotless, their eyes distant, when asked about the conditions below. In September 1851, federal surveyor Cornelius Vance arrived to map mineral claims. His official report described a prosperous but unusual settlement. His private journal, discovered decades later, told a far stranger story. Staying with the Cranston family, he noticed that every night 7 places were set for dinner, though only 4 people ate. Mrs. Cranston explained simply, their working below her tone oddly rehearsed. The untouched chairs were cleared afterward, the plates bearing crumbs and stains, as if someone invisible had used them. On his 3rd night, kept awake by a low subterranean hum, Vance followed a midnight procession of men into the forest. They moved in perfect formation without light, as if following an unseen trail, until they reached a camouflaged entrance to the old working hidden beneath a false equipment shed. 30 men descended without a word, each carrying only a small leather pouch at his neck. Vance felt the hum shift into his bones, blurring his vision as if the men were resonating rather than singing. When he tried to count them, the number warped 3,303 before slipping away. At dawn, only 28 emerged, their pouches heavy, their skin faintly gleaming as if dusted in fine copper. The missing 2 were neither spoken of nor acknowledged. When Vance cautiously asked Henley about it the next day, Henley's smile didn't touch his eyes. "The mountain takes its share, Mr. Vance. 2 from 30 is a fair tax. Your government takes more and gives less. Would you like to see our operation? We could use a man like you." Vance left Hollow Ridge that same afternoon, claiming urgent business elsewhere. Cornelius Vance's official report to the government was dry and unremarkable, noting only that Hollow Ridge's mineral claims appeared valid, and that its copper was of exceptional quality. But his private journal told a far darker story. There is something unnatural in that place, something wearing the face of prosperity, but stinking of decay. The copper is real enough, but the cost of its extraction is not measured in dollars alone. What they have awakened will not be sated by a few lives. It will grow hungry. It will demand more. And God help us when it can no longer be fed. The vanishings continued with the precision of a clockwork mechanism every 3 months on the night of the new moon. Always at night. Always a single shoe still warm with clay and pine needles, each time containing something new, fragments of unknown minerals, crystalline organic matter unlike any plant or animal, or tiny metal spheres that rolled on their own toward the mine. Victims came from every demographic: men, women, children, newcomers, and founding families alike. But the pattern was clear: exactly 1 person from each family in turn. No repeats until every household had suffered a loss. Thomas McGreedy, whose son William was the second to vanish, began keeping a hidden journal in a hollow tree, detailing both the disappearances and the disturbing prosperity that followed each one. Within days of a sacrifice, copper output jumped precisely 33%. Barren rock revealed new veins, and ore quality soared to impossible levels. McGreedy also recorded changes in the townspeople's skin, with a faint copper sheen that glinted in sunlight, eyes reflecting green in the dark like a cat's. And children born after 1850 who never cried under any circumstance, simply staring with those reflective eyes in silent patience. By the late 1850s, McGreedy's entries became fevered. He described shared dreams in which the entire settlement moved through stone like water-breathing metal instead of air, guided by a vast alien intelligence living within the crystalline lattice of copper. He wrote of waking at night to find his wife speaking an unearthly language that made the walls vibrate, conversing with something deep below, that answered in resonant tones, felt more than heard. After the Civil War, Hollow Ridge's isolation ended. Plans were made to run a spur of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad through the valley, and federal agents began surveying its resources. Among them was Samuel Hartley of the Baltimore Sun. Drawn by rumors of uncanny prosperity, voiceless children and miners who worked in total darkness without a single accident. Posing as a traveling merchant, Hartley spent 3 months in Hollow Ridge. On the surface, it was a model mining town. Church services, school recitals, social gatherings. But beneath that facade ran an intricate web of ritual and sacrifice that had evolved into a religion. Its god was no god known to Christianity, but something older than history. Hartley attended gratitude gatherings held the night before each new moon. They began like ordinary prayer meetings with Reverend Sutterfield reading scripture and leading hymns. But as midnight drew near, the language shifted first to Latin, then to something older than any recorded human tongue. The congregation's voices layered into impossible harmonics, as if the sound came from the walls, the floor, the very air. Sutterfield's sermons no longer spoke of salvation, but of the covenant, of the depths, the blessed transaction, and the willing gift. His Bible had been altered with pages of beaten copper so thin they were nearly transparent, inscribed with text that changed depending on the angle of the light. He preached of a God older than the Christian one, older than man, as ancient as the metal in the earth itself. Hartley transcribed the congregation's catechism. What do we owe? Everything we are and will be. To whom do we owe it? To that which dwells in the deepness. How do we pay? With willing flesh and grateful souls. When will the debt be paid? When the last star burns cold and the earth gives up its final secret. On December 15, 1865, Hartley witnessed a selection ceremony. The entire population, from infants to the frail elderly, gathered in the church as a suffocating fog pressed against the windows. The only light came from candles made of a substance not quite wax their flames. The same eerie blue-green that marked every fire in Hollow Ridge, and their scent, a nauseating blend of copper meat and rot, would haunt Hartley for the rest of his life. A copper vessel was brought forth impossibly old and etched with symbols that twisted and writhed when glimpsed from the corner of the eye markings that seemed to resist being looked at directly. It passed from hand to hand through the congregation, each person dropping in a small token, a coin, a button, a lock of hair, a child's tooth. None of the offerings made a sound when they fell, as though the inside of the vessel was far larger than its modest size suggested. Then Henley, 60 years old, yet untouched by time, reached in. His arms sank up to the shoulder, despite the vessel being barely a foot deep. Minutes ticked by on the clock, though it felt like hours before he withdrew a single brass button from the coat of Jacob Forrester, a recent widower who had come to Hollow Ridge only months earlier. Forrester stood without resistance, tears slipping down his cheeks as neighbors embraced him, whispering words that made him smile faintly through his grief. His twin sons were taken in by the Dietrich family with quiet solemnity. The ritual was precise movements and phrases polished by 27 years of repetition. That night, Forrester walked alone through the fog to the old working. Hartley shadowed him at a distance, watching as Forrester removed his clothing, folded it neatly on a bench, and donned a robe that moved like liquid, clinging in unnatural ways. He descended into the shaft and never returned. At dawn, Hartley found only a single left shoe on the bench, filled with the familiar clay and pine needles, along with something new. A photograph of Forrester's late wife, now transformed into paper-thin beaten copper. Her eyes in the image seemed aware, tracking the viewer with a gaze no photograph should hold. While searching the church's cornerstone, Hartley unearthed the original compact, signed by Hollow Ridge's founders. Written on treated human skin turned green by copper salts, it was both land claim and unholy contract. In plain English, it bound the settlement to those who dwell beneath trading an endless supply of copper, for lives willingly given according to the lunar cycle. Selection would be fair, one per family chosen by chance. But refusal meant a fate described only as the rising and the consumption. Each name was signed in blood that, though decades old, remained damp and metallic to the touch. An addendum in Henley's handwriting dated 1847 accepted the role of shepherds of the feeding and acknowledged that their children's children would inherit both the blessing and the curse. Attempts to break the compact had ended in horror. In 1853, the Washburn family tried to flee and were found the next morning transformed into copper statues, later melted down and distributed as jewelry. In 1859, Robert Cranston and his conspirators tried to seal the mine with explosives. But the blast left the entrance untouched and aged the saboteurs by half a century in a single night. March 15th, 1874. exactly 27 years after the first disappearance arrived, like an executioner's drumbeat. The number 27 was everywhere in the mine's symbols and Cherokee curses in the strange numerology of the compact. This time the vessel selected Mary Henley Josiah's 16-year-old granddaughter. She was beloved by all, a teacher, a caretaker, a voice of grace, in a place that had forgotten such things. For the first time in Hollow Ridge's history, the chosen refused. Mary barricaded herself inside her family's home, having long suspected her turn was coming. In letters hidden around the house, she wrote of what happened to those who went below, that they did not die, but were fused into the copper itself. Consciousness trapped forever in metal, aware and suffering. Better to face the end as human, she wrote, than live as what we are becoming. The town gathered outside, pleading until their voices broke. As midnight approached, Josiah Henley himself knelt in the mud, speaking to her in that ancient, wordless language. When the new moon rose, the ground began to breathe. The slow, massive inhalations and exhalations shook the valley. Warm, copper-scented winds hissed from widening cracks in the soil. Burden Creek reversed its flow, surging uphill toward the old working, the water turning bright red, not rust, but fresh blood. Fish swam backward, eyes glowing the same green as the miners. Birds dropped from the sky alive, but altered their feathers, streaked with metallic veins. And above it all, the air seemed to hum with something vast, and waking something that had waited 27 years for its due. Their feathers had become copper wire so fine it could have been spun into thread, their bodies still twitching, still attempting to fly with wings now incapable of lift. From the old working came a sound no one could ever quite name, a terrible chorus that was both scream and hymn. A single voice made from many. It was the sound of the 93, who had been taken over the years, their consciousness somehow preserved, calling from whatever state they now existed in. Some claimed they could recognize individuals. Margaret Dietrich softly singing the lullaby she once hummed at her sewing table, William McGreedy calling out for his father, young Timothy Cranston, reciting arithmetic tables on an endless loop. Henley understood then that the compact could not simply end. For 27 years, they had fed something vast and hidden, keeping its hunger focused and contained. If the feeding stopped, the thing below would rise, and its appetite would not end at Hollow Ridge. The copper veins beneath the Appalachians connected far beyond their valley, and the hunger would travel them like a contagion in a bloodstream. Joined by the 3 other surviving founders, Friedrich Dietrich, still physically strong at 73. Thomas McGreedy, keeper of the settlement's grim records, and Reverend Sutterfield, the man who had reshaped their faith. Henley descended into the old working for the last time. They carried tools prepared for this single possibility, ropes braided from 27 years of collected human hair preserved with copper salts. Lanterns burning the eerie blue-green flame that revealed spaces no ordinary light could touch. And the original copper vessel now filled with the personal effects of all 93 vanished souls. Samuel Hartley, hidden in the upper galleries for days, was the only witness. In his shaking handwriting, blotched with what appeared to be copper-tinted tears, he described how the 4 old men descended past the known workings into chambers that had never been mapped because they defied mapping geometry that shifted when observed dimensions that refused to remain constant. Time itself warped. Hours seemed to pass, while Hartley's watch marked only minutes. The chamber they reached was both vast and close, lit by minerals that cast upward shadows and illuminated what wasn't there, while leaving the visible in darkness. At its heart lay the truth of Hollow Ridge, not a monster, but a process. The walls were lined with mummified bodies from a civilization long vanished, each one fused to the end of a copper vein, metal grown through them like roots through soil. They were not dead. The copper sustained them in a state between life and death, their nervous systems replaced with a network of copper filaments transmitting something older than thought. The 93 from Hollow Ridge were here too, caught mid-transformation, skin threaded with metal eyes, still conscious. Margaret Dietrich turned her head as Henley approached her, gaze clear, almost forgiving. At the center of it all pulsed the nameless mechanism the ancients had once mistaken for immortality. Copper was not just metal. It was a medium for thought, preserving awareness across geological time. Those who had first discovered it had fed themselves into it, willingly seeking transcendence, and had found instead eternal consciousness without control. Endless existence as part of a living mineral mind. 3 days later, federal investigators arrived, summoned by reports of an earthquake no seismograph had recorded. They found the mine sealed, the rock hardened into patterns like muscle fiber stone that matched no local geology. Henley, Dietrich, McGreedy, and Sutterfield were gone, their bodies never recovered. Mary Henley had survived, her hair turned pure white, her eyes gray as slate, speaking only to say, they chose to hold the door closed. Pray it stays that way. Most disturbing were the 93 who staggered out of the surrounding forests, people missing not just from Hollow Ridge, but from towns all across the Appalachians, some gone for decades. None could explain how they had come to be there. Medical examinations revealed hair-turned white skin marked with vein-like copper patterns, and identical whispered accounts of dreams in which they were buried alive, yet aware, able to feel every grain of earth, every trickle of water, for what felt like centuries. Several of the returned had to be physically restrained when they tried to re-enter the collapsed mine, insisting they had left something vital below, though none could articulate what. The official government report, classified until 1974 under the National Security Act, described Hollow Ridge as an illegal mining operation whose reckless methods caused widespread mercury and copper poisoning, resulting in hallucinations and mental instability. The settlement was evacuated, the valley condemned, and the land declared off limits under the guise of geological instability. Nowhere in the report was there mention of the 93 people who had seemingly returned from the dead. Officially, they were listed as displaced persons found during the evacuation. But Samuel Hartley's hidden journal, discovered decades later in the wall of his cell at the Shepherd Pratt Asylum, told another story. Before his final descent into madness, Hartley wrote of a last bargain made deep underground. Henley, Dietrich, McGreedy, and Sutterfield offered themselves as permanent guardians, not fuel. Their bodies would become integrated into the copper network as conscious regulators, their will devoted solely to holding back what lay below. The collapse, Hartley claimed, was not an accident. It was Henley using the last of the explosives placed over decades to seal the old working for good. But it was more than a physical barrier. The 4 men positioned themselves at strategic points within the chamber, letting the copper grow through them, while they still lived, transforming them into living locks, whose continued awareness kept the door closed. The 93 survivors were scattered across the country by federal order, their families separated to prevent reunions. Most died within 5 years, their bodies unable to adapt away from the mineral-saturated environment of Hollow Ridge. Before their deaths, many described the same recurring dream, standing in a vast chamber watching 4 men slowly turn to copper, their faces locked in expressions of grim resolve as their bodies rooted through the rock, sealing a door that must never open. Mary Henley, whose refusal had broken the compact, vanished during relocation. Rumors in the 1880s placed her among the Cherokee in North Carolina, teaching children about the deep places and the necessity of keeping certain doors closed. She was said to carry a copper vessel etched with painful shifting symbols, claiming it held contracts and promises made by those who learned too late that some knowledge has a cost that can never be paid. Today, Hollow Ridge lies within a federally protected wilderness, closed to the public under severe penalties. Officially, the reason is geological instability and contamination from historic mining. Satellite images show a perfect 5-mile radius around the former settlement, where nothing grows the ground, neither living nor dead. Water samples from the site still contain copper at impossible concentrations, copper that remains at human body temperature and makes water move in slow rhythmic pulses like breathing. Every 3 months on the nights of the new moon, seismic monitors pick up vibrations from deep underground, steady and patient, their rhythm matching an immense inhuman respiration. These pulses peak on March 15th, June 15th, September 15th, and December 15th. The original sacrifice dates as though something beneath still expects to be fed. Attempts to study the site have ended in disaster. In 1889, a Smithsonian geological team bored 30 feet into the collapsed entrance before hitting something impossible, a vein of copper liquid at room temperature flowing upward against gravity. Withdrawn, it was found to be fused with organic matter, as though flesh and metal had merged. The hole was sealed with molten lead, which Henley's old notes had named as copper's natural enemy, and the team left within hours. Hunters in the 1880s and 90s reported finding left shoes in the surrounding forest. Always warm, always filled with clay and pine needles, sometimes containing relics of the vanished. By the turn of the century, 97 such shoes had been documented, one for each person taken during Hollow Ridge's 27 years. Guards posted in the early years told of hearing something calling from underground. On those same quarterly dates, 97 distinct tones speaking in unison, promising unimaginable wealth to anyone who would break the seal. Tools left near the boundary were found, moved closer to the valley's center. Compasses spun wildly before pointing straight down. Among President Ulysses S. Grant's private papers was a letter dated 1874. The situation in West Virginia has been contained, but at terrible cost. We must ensure that no one reopens that mine. The 4 who sacrificed themselves understood what I cannot put in the record. Some hungers once awakened can never be satisfied, only contained. Their vigil must not be disturbed. Sodi. Charbarm Sardur. The letter was accompanied by a map of copper deposits stretching across North America Hollow Ridge at the center, with certain other points marked in red sites where similar discoveries had been sealed. Other bargains made other doors waiting for someone foolish enough to open them. In his final entry, Hartley wrote with startling clarity, "We tell ourselves the earth is dead matter, rock, and soil from which we extract lifeless wealth. But the earth is alive in ways we cannot comprehend. And in some places, it is hungry. The 97 who fed that hunger are neither dead nor alive, but something between something that should never be. And the 4 who chose to become eternal guardians, their bodies willingly transformed into living locks, are now the only thing holding back that hunger from spilling into the world above. God help us if their vigil ever fails." Mary Henley was never officially located after her disappearance from federal custody. But in the 1880s, stories circulated through Appalachian towns of a pale-haired woman with gray eyes who warned miners about deep copper that grew too pure, stayed warm to the touch, and made water pulse like a living thing. She was said to carry an ancient copper vessel covered in shifting serpentine symbols, and claimed it held the last testament of those who learned too late that some bargains could not be broken, only passed on to the next desperate, ambitious generation. The final official record on Hollow Ridge came in 1891 from the newly formed U.S. Geological Survey, declaring the valley a permanent exclusion zone under federal law. It cited anomalous geological properties inconsistent with regional norms and banned all mining or development within 10 miles. The details of those anomalies were sealed, accessible only with congressional approval that has never been granted. Local folklore in the surrounding counties still names Hollow Ridge as a cursed place. But the stories have been blurred over time, perhaps deliberately, to keep anyone from piecing together the truth. Some tell of a plague, others a catastrophic collapse, others still of a pact with things living in the deep earth. But all agree on one warning: the mountain remembers, and it waits patiently for someone to forget why the seals were placed. By the late 19th century, West Virginia's copper industry was thriving. Yet miners followed unwritten rules passed down in whispers. Never dig past a certain depth, never pursue veins that hold human body warmth, never work a shaft where water runs uphill or where copper regrows after harvest. These were not in any official handbook, but every foreman knew them. Some things they understood were more valuable left untouched. So what do you think? Did the government truly erase every trace of Hollow Ridge from history? Or are there other places hidden in America's forgotten corners where people once traded their humanity for prosperity? Could other doors like the one beneath Hollow Ridge still exist, sealed and waiting for a hand foolish enough to open them? Tell us your theory in the comments. Do you believe the 97 souls are truly gone? Or do you think they remain below aware inside their copper prisons, waiting for the seal to break? If you enjoyed this descent into one of America's most unsettling hidden histories, subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell and share this story with someone who loves an unsolved mystery. And remember, some doors are sealed for a reason. Some hungers should never be fed, and some bargains will follow you long after they're made. The mountain remembers, and it is patient. Next time, we'll step into another vanished settlement erased from maps and memory. A place that, like Hollow Ridge, learned too late that the earth keeps its own secrets, and some were never meant for human eyes.
Thank you everyone for watching the whole video. Please like and subscribe to watch more good videos.